My name is Sloane, I'm 38 years old, and I was a senior financial analyst at a wealth management firm in Calgary when my husband of 9 years handed me a manila envelope across our kitchen island and told me to sign. He didn't look at me when he said it, he was checking his phone. I had spent the better part of a decade believing that the distance between us was my fault, that if I worked less, if I smiled more, if I stopped bringing up the fertility appointments in front of his colleagues, things would somehow correct themselves the way markets do. Dip hard, then recover. I kept waiting for the recovery, it never came. The envelope had a sticky note on it, his assistant's handwriting, not his. That was the part that broke something open in me. He hadn't even written the note himself. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he still was, legally, on that Tuesday in February, managed a private equity portfolio and had the kind of name in this city that got tables at restaurants before they opened to the public. We had met at a conference in Vancouver 11 years earlier. He had been charming in the way that men with money learn to be charming. I had been impressed in the way that women who grew up with very little learn to be impressed by the wrong things. I remember thinking, standing in that kitchen with marble countertops I had picked out, and a coffee maker I had bought, and a houseplant I had nursed back from the edge of dying, that I didn't recognize a single thing in the room as mine anymore. Not really. The firm's lawyers drew it up, he said, still looking at his phone. It's fair. I set the envelope down. Where is this coming from? He finally looked up, and the expression on his face, it wasn't guilt, it wasn't grief, it was inconvenience, like I was a meeting he had to reschedule. Sloane, he said my name like it was a sentence, like it explained everything. How long, I said. He didn't answer. How long has it been going on? He set his phone face down on the counter, which was the most attention he had given me in months. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He looked toward the window. Outside, it was snowing, the kind of quiet, relentless snow that Calgary does in February, the kind that buries everything slowly. Her name is Jade. She's 26. She works on the analytics team. He paused. She's pregnant. I heard the words. I process them the way you process a car accident. You see it, you understand what it is, and then about 3 seconds later the information actually lands in your body. 9 years, 4 rounds of IVF, 2 miscarriages, one that had required a hospital stay. One that had happened on a Thursday, and by Friday I had been back at my desk because he had a client dinner and said it would look bad if we both canceled. And Jade from the analytics team was 26 and pregnant. I picked up the envelope and I walked upstairs. I heard him call my name once. I didn't stop. I went into the bedroom closet and I sat down on the floor between my winter coats and my work blazers, and I put my hands over my mouth and I didn't make a sound. I had gotten very good over the years at not making sounds. I stayed on that closet floor for a long time. When I came out, I went to the small cedar jewelry box on top of my dresser. Inside, it was a bracelet my grandmother had given me when I turned 19. 3 linked silver bands with a small sapphire clasp that she had brought from Scotland when she immigrated in the 70s. It was the only thing I owned that I had never once considered selling, even during the years before my career took off when money was genuinely tight. I put it on my wrist. I changed out of my work clothes. I packed a bag. When I came downstairs, my mother-in-law was standing in the kitchen. I hadn't heard her come in. She had a key because we had given her a key 3 years ago when she was recovering from knee surgery and needed someone to check on the dog. She looked at my bag, she looked at me. "This is for the best," she said. Her voice was not unkind, exactly. It was the voice of someone who had already decided how the story ended and was simply informing me of the conclusion. "I'd like the key back," I said. She set it on the counter. "The house is in his name, you know that." It was, technically. We had bought it 5 years in, and the mortgage was structured the way he had wanted it structured, with his name primary and mine as a secondary borrower, and at the time I hadn't pushed back because I trusted him, and because I was still learning that trust and paperwork are 2 completely separate things. "I know," I said. "His father and I always thought." She started. "Please don't," I said. She stopped. I walked out. I drove to my sister's apartment in the Beltline. It was a 1-bedroom, and she had a couch that was technically a love seat. And the first night I lay on it with my feet hanging off the end and stared at the ceiling and thought about absolutely nothing, because my brain had simply stopped cooperating. My sister made eggs in the morning and didn't ask me to talk about it. She just put the plate in front of me and sat across the table and drank her coffee. She was 4 years younger than me, and she had the emotional intelligence of someone 3 times her age, and I had always privately been a little in awe of her. You can stay here as long as you need, she said. I need to find a place. You need to eat your eggs first. I ate my eggs. I called my HR department that afternoon. I didn't explain details, but I indicated I needed a personal leave, and my manager, to her credit, simply said take what you need and didn't ask questions. I had 11 years of good performance reviews and zero drama. I had built up a significant amount of goodwill by being the kind of person who solved problems quietly. The irony of that particular skill set was not lost on me. The next 3 weeks were the administrative demolition of a marriage. I found a lawyer, a woman I had heard about through a colleague, sharp and efficient and completely uninterested in sentimentality. She reviewed the documents he had given me and looked up over her glasses and said, "Don't sign anything he sends you. I'll handle this." His lawyers were not pleased. He was not pleased. He called me twice, which was more than he had called me in the previous 6 months combined. And both times I let it go to voicemail, and both times the message was some version of this doesn't have to be difficult. Everything he had ever wanted had not been difficult. His whole life had been arranged around the principle of things not being difficult for him. I found a rental in Inglewood, the main floor of an older house, 1 bedroom, good light, radiator heat that clanged at 3 in the morning. The landlord was a retired schoolteacher who lived upstairs and kept a small herb garden in the shared backyard. The rent was manageable. It was mine. I moved in on a Saturday with my sister and 2 of her friends who owned a truck. We made 3 trips. By evening I had a bed, a kitchen table, my clothes, and a box of books. My sister ordered Thai food and we ate it on the floor, and she made me laugh twice, and I was surprised both times that I still knew how to do that. The nights were the hard part. The days I could fill. The nights had their own specific quality of silence. I started running in the mornings. I hadn't run since university, but I needed somewhere to put the energy that woke me up at 5 a.m. like a full-body alarm. I ran along the river pathway, in the cold, with my breath-making clouds, and I thought about nothing or tried to think about nothing, and mostly I thought about everything, but at least my legs were moving. That's how I met my neighbor. He lived in the other half of the older house, accessed by a separate entrance on the east side. A small suite that I had assumed was empty because I never heard anyone over there. But on the 4th morning of my runs, I nearly collided with him coming around the corner of the building. He was also running, apparently. He had the slightly startled expression of a person who had grown accustomed to being the only one on that particular route at that particular hour. "Sorry," we both said simultaneously, and then both almost smiled. His name was James. He was 44, I would learn later, a former RCMP investigator who had taken early retirement after a case he didn't like to talk about and now consulted quietly for a private security firm, and occasionally for prosecutors who needed someone who understood how financial crimes were structured and hidden and moved. I didn't know any of that on the corner at 5:30 in the morning. I just knew he said sorry at the same time I did, and that he looked like a person who had also been awake for several hours before deciding to go outside and do something about it. We started running at the same time most mornings, not by arrangement exactly. It just kept happening, the way things do when 2 people are operating on the same particular frequency of not sleeping. He didn't ask me why I had moved in. I didn't ask him why he was in the suite next door instead of something larger, when it was clear from small details that he could afford something larger. We talked about the river, about the neighborhood, about a bakery 3 blocks over that made exceptional cardamom buns. Normal things. I started sleeping a little better. My lawyer called me on a Tuesday in March with a tone in her voice that I had learned to read as carefully controlled. "His firm is under review," she said. The OSSC, the Ontario Securities Commission, had been alerted, she explained, to irregularities in how certain client portfolios had been managed. Specifically, fees had been structured in a way that benefited the fund managers at the client's expense, and several clients had begun asking questions at roughly the same time. I sat very still on my kitchen chair. "How long has this been happening?" I said. "That's what they're determining," she said. "But Sloane, some of the structuring happened during the period when you were listed as a secondary account holder on 2 joint investment vehicles. I never had access to those accounts, I know, but we need to get ahead of this. I'm going to have a forensic accountant I work with go through everything." I hung up and sat in my kitchen and looked out the window at the herb garden where tiny green shoots were starting to come up from the soil, because it was technically spring now, even if it didn't feel like it. I thought about Jade from the analytics team. I wondered if she knew. I wondered if she had ever been asked to do things at work that she had told herself were probably fine. I went for a walk. James was on the front step with 2 coffees, which had started happening on days when neither of us had run in the morning. He handed me one without a word. "Bad news?" he asked. "Complicated news," he nodded. He had the manner of someone who had spent 20 years listening to complicated news and had learned that most of it just needed a moment to settle before it could be understood. "My soon-to-be ex-husband's firm is under securities investigation," I said. He looked at his coffee cup. "I heard about that, actually." I looked at him. "I consult," he said carefully, "for some people who are connected to that process, not directly, but adjacently." He paused. "I didn't know it was your husband's firm until 2 weeks ago." I was going to say something. I thought about that for a moment. "What would you have said?" Probably something like, "Make sure your name isn't attached to anything you didn't have full knowledge of and full control over." My lawyer is already on that. Good, we drank our coffee. The herb garden had a small robin investigating it. "He's going to try to say I knew things," I said. "That's going to be his play. To make me look complicit so it reduces his exposure." "Yes," James said. "That would be a predictable move. What happens to predictable moves? They work sometimes." He looked at me. "And sometimes the person they're pointed at has an extremely clear paper trail demonstrating they had no meaningful involvement, which makes the move look desperate and retaliatory, which then makes the person making it look worse." I thought about 9 years of being the secondary name on things. Of deferring because he said it was efficient. Of trusting because I was tired and grieving and pouring everything I had into cycles and appointments and trying not to hope too much. "I have a very clear paper trail," I said. "I know," he said. "I've seen enough of them to recognize the difference." I went back inside and called my lawyer and told her everything I had just learned. The investigation moved quickly once it moved. His firm was suspended from trading. 3 senior partners were named in the filing. His name was the second one listed. He called me 7 times in 4 days. I answered on the 5th call because I wanted him to hear my voice be calm. "You have to know I didn't mean for this to touch you," he said. "It's not going to touch me," I said. "That's already handled. Sloane, if we'd stayed together, we didn't. I need you to." "No," I said. "I don't. Goodbye." I hung up and I sat with that for a minute. There was something that felt very clean about it, like a bone that had been set wrong and had finally been corrected. What I didn't know yet was that I was pregnant. I found out on a Wednesday in April at my GP's office during a routine blood panel I'd been meaning to do for 3 months. My doctor came in with a particular expression, and I thought for a moment it was something genuinely alarming, and then she said the number and I said, "I'm sorry, what?" And she said it again. 8 weeks. I sat in that exam room for a long time after she stepped out to give me a moment. I looked at the poster on the wall about hand washing. I looked at the paper covering the table. I thought about 4 rounds of IVF. I thought about 2 mornings a week running along the river in the cold. I thought about the specific biology of stress hormones and what happens when they stop being the dominant chemical in your body. I drove home. I sat in my car in front of the house for 10 minutes. Then I got out and knocked on James's door. He opened it and read my face the way he read most things, quickly, accurately, without drama. "I need to tell you something," I said. "Okay," he said and stepped back to let me in. We talked for 4 hours. It was the longest continuous conversation I had ever had with another person that wasn't about work or logistics or someone else's feelings. We talked about what we wanted, what we hadn't expected, what scared us, what felt, cautiously and tentatively, and with full acknowledgement that it could all go sideways, like it might also be something good. He made dinner. We ate at his small table. Afterwards he said, "Whatever you decide, I'm here." That part isn't conditional. I looked at him across the table. "You were an RCMP investigator for 20 years, I said. "Yes, and you walked away." "I did. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I spent 20 years making sure other people were accountable, and then I realized I hadn't been paying very much attention to my own life." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I'm paying attention now." "Me too," I said. "I'm paying very much attention now." The divorce was finalized in August. My lawyer had done what she said she would do. My name was cleanly removed from every implication, every insinuation, every predictable move he had tried to make in the 3 months since the investigation began. The forensic accountant's report was thorough. My paper trail was, as James had said, very clear. His wasn't. He lost his registration. The firm was dissolved. There were civil suits from clients. Jade and I had learned by then that she had indeed known more than she should have about how the accounts were structured, because she had processed some of the paperwork herself. Was named in a secondary filing. She retained her own lawyers, separate from his, which told me she had at least had the sense to understand where that ship was going. Their baby was born in September. I heard about it from his sister, who had always been decent to me, and seemed to feel that I deserved to know things were not going well in that particular household. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might. I felt something quieter, more like the moment when a very long winter finally just stops. I had my anatomy scan in October. The technician moved the probe in a very specific way and then looked up with that particular neutral face expression that means they've seen something they're deciding how to phrase. "So," she said, "do you want to see something interesting?" I turned my head to look at the screen. 2. They were 2. I called my sister from the parking lot, shaking, and she screamed loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear, and then she said, oh my God, okay, I'm coming over," and I started laughing and couldn't stop for a full minute. I called James next. He picked up on the second ring. "Twins," I said. There was a pause, then "okay," he said, in that voice he had, measured and clear, and then he laughed, really laughed, the way I had never heard him laugh before, and it was one of the best sounds I had ever heard in my life. We got married the following March, quietly, at a small ceremony in the backyard of my sister's friend's property outside of Canmore, with the mountains in the background and approximately 20 people present. My grandmother's bracelet was on my wrist. The divorce had been final for 7 months by then. The paperwork was correct. Everything was in order. The twins were born the following June, both healthy, both loud, both entirely unimpressed with any plans I had ever made. James had a daughter from a previous marriage, 17 by then, who came to the hospital and looked at her new half-siblings through the nursery window with an expression that started out wary and ended up soft. She held one of them later, sitting very carefully in the chair, and didn't say anything for a long time. I didn't need her to. My former husband's civil trial began in the fall. I was not called as a witness. My lawyer had ensured that outcome with the same methodical care she brought to everything. I read the coverage in the financial news the way you read about weather in a city you used to live in. Aware of it, occasionally interested, fundamentally removed from it. He had tried, in the final months before the divorce was finalized, to characterize me as someone who had been a silent partner in decisions I hadn't known were being made. His own counsel had eventually advised him to abandon that strategy. The paper trail again. What I had been, for 9 years, was a woman who worked hard and grieved quietly, and trusted the wrong person with the paperwork. I had corrected all of those things except the hard work. I went back to the firm, a different firm, smaller, with a mandate that required significantly more ethical documentation. In January, when the twins were 6 months old, my sister took them 2 days a week. James restructured his consulting hours. We figured it out the way people figure things out when they have decided that the thing is worth figuring out. Some mornings I still get up before anyone else and put on my running shoes and go out to the river pathway. The light comes up over the east side of the city, and the water moves below the bank, and my breath makes clouds in the cold, and everything is very still and very clear. I'm not running from anything anymore. I'm just running.